Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you are doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, so welcome back to part 2 of my video taking a look at this prototype of Dungeons of Doria. This is a game that is going to be hitting Kickstarter sometime in the very near future, and this was a prototype provided to me by the designer of the game. It's a very nicely made prototype. If you haven't watched my first video on this, I suggest you do because I go through all of the components and all of the stuff that was included in the game that is going to be included in the Kickstarter version. But just keep in mind, this is a prototype, and so things might end up looking different. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a few of the things I like, a handful of the things that I think are really cool about this game, and a few things that I would like to see changed, modified, or maybe a couple little problems I have with the game. Overall, I think this game has a lot of promise, and I think a lot of people are going to like what this game is doing. But let's start with some positive things. So the main thing that is just a huge positive about this game is the loot, how the loot is used, how the loot helps with the character creation and optimization and leveling up. And there is just so much loot in the game. I had a huge stack of cards I've shown in the first video, but over here in my card holder, all of those cards are loot cards. And there are over 400 different loot cards. Now, not every single one of these cards in here is a piece of loot. And that is one of the things that I like, because as you are drawing loot, there are also chances that you are going to be drawing traps. And the traps kind of act like, almost like event cards, where different things are going to happen if you draw these traps. There are chances for you to disarm the trap, chances for you to dodge the effects of a trap, but you kind of never know what you're going to draw when you draw from this loot deck. Now, because there are like 400 plus cards in this loot deck, that initial shuffle is going to be very important, because you really want to make sure that all of the different types of armor, potions, weapons, and traps, you want to make sure that all of those things are really well shuffled, because your ability to do well in this game really does hinge upon you drawing useful items and a variety of useful items. And I think it is also fun to have those traps peppered throughout, sprinkled throughout, so that you have this kind of a push your luck, random chance of something really crazy happening when you draw a piece of loot, like a bouncy trap here, or we saw some acid traps earlier. Here is a pendulum of death. And there are just so many, and the loot is so cool. I mean, we have different potions, basic potions that you can find, piercing arrows, all kinds of different spells that you can find. You have weapons and armor. So you have head armor, you have hand armor, body armor, things you can wear on your feet, different kinds of trinkets, all kinds of different weapons, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons. So you have this meat cleaver, you have ranged weapons and melee weapons. There is just so much cool stuff. And one of the neatest things about this game is just when you get the chance to draw loot and you find something that is enticing, and then that makes you want to build your character towards that piece of loot. And so that brings me to the second point that I like, is the character progression system. So this game really does utilize a character progression and stat system that is a lot like Dark Souls. So if you guys have played Dark Souls or Bloodborne, or really any of the From Software games, you know that when you pick your initial class, in this case, we have classes like the Assassin, or the Priest, or the Warrior over there, or the Shield Maiden here. When you pick your initial class in this game, all you are really doing is you are picking your initial stats and your initial starting gear, okay? That is really it. As you progress through the game, as you level up your Shield Maiden and your Shield Maiden gets more powerful, she is not going to be learning a variety of Shield Maiden skills. Your Assassin, as she levels up, is not going to be learning more Assassin skills. What you're going to be doing is as you level up, you are going to be putting more points in your basic stats, your basic attributes. Because each of the weapons, each of the pieces of gear that you find are going to have certain attributes that you have to meet in order to equip that piece of gear. So your Shield Maiden, she starts off with a lot of strength and a lot of agility. So you are going to be hopefully looking for gear, whether you can buy it from the store or find it in treasure chests that has strength or agility. But that doesn't mean that you can't use other gear. It just means that you will have to level up those stats more. And so you really can kind of craft your own kind of character depending on the gear you find. So ultimately, what this means is, like the From Software video games, your class does not dictate a lot about your character. Your character is all about the loot and its stats. And those are fully customizable as you are playing the game. Additionally, you could also start this game out by just drawing like 6 pieces of random loot and then creating a character around that loot. And I was thinking it might be kind of fun to try that out. So let's see, we have a new character here. We're starting a new one-off scenario. And let's just draw, let's take this stack of loot cards here and let's just, let's give it a little shuffle here. And then let's pick 6 random cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if I was using this kind of system here, I would probably allow for one kind of mulligan, because there is a chance that you could end up with like 6 potions or all spells or something like that. So let's take a look at what we got. So we're going to discard traps. Okay, so we're going to draw 2 additional cards. Okay, so what did we get? We got a spell here that needs a Constitution of 11 and a Psi of 15. Okay, that's a pretty kind of a late level spell. That's Heal Deadly Wounds. We got a potion. There are no stat requirements for potions, so we could keep that potion in order to use that. We've got some shoes that need a Wisdom of 5 and a Perception of 6. Those are pretty low level. Another potion. And then we have 2 weapons. So we might want to build a character around one of these weapons. We have a spear sling and a longbow. The longbow is a ranged weapon that has a range of 5. And the spear sling is also a ranged weapon. It's a throwing weapon that has a range of 5. And so that needs a 13, 13, and a 14, and a 14. So the longbow might be a better starting weapon. So let's say we wanted to keep these 2, and we wanted to keep, 2 small potions. So now we have 2 cards, and I would say, okay, let's mulligan these, and let's just draw 2 more. Okay, so now we have a shield blade, which you can use this as a shield and as a weapon. That's super cool. And a full metal set, okay, or a helmet that is part of the full metal set. Now, what's interesting with armor is you are allowed to decide if you want to use a piece of armor when you are attacked to negate a certain number of damage. So these shoes could negate 1 point of damage. This helmet could negate up to 8 points of damage. But when you utilize a piece of armor in order to negate damage, that armor becomes broken. And you put a broken token on there. Now, that just means that armor can no longer be used to negate damage. You still get all of the other benefits of that armor. You just can't use it again to negate damage until you repair it. And to repair it, it costs a certain number of action points that you can spend on your turn. In this case, 7. But what's really interesting is as you start building sets, so there's a full metal set in here. There might be 4, might be 5 pieces of armor in that set. you can repair the entire set in one turn by spending the highest number of action points on the single piece of equipment in that set. Really neat thing, really neat idea about using armor and then having to repair it. I like that. It gives you a choice to make in combat that a lot of these kinds of games do not have. But we also have this shield. So I'm thinking like, man, this shield might actually be a cool weapon to start a character around because it only needs an 8 and a 9. And this can be used as a weapon where you would roll 3 dice and add a 1. It can also be used as a shield where you roll 2 dice and add 5. It does 1 point of damage, and it has no modifier on your initiative value, so that means you're not going to be slower or faster to use this weapon. And it is going to cost 10 action points to attack with. That is pretty heavy attack, though. And the longbow, though, is going to cost 20 action points to use. So that is a really, that takes a lot. So I think I'm going to go ahead and keep, I will just keep this longbow in my pack. I can always trade it in for another value, 2 coins in order to spend. So I'm going to build a character around, kind of like around these 3 items here. You know, I can wear my shoes, no problem. You know, actually, I might want to be really tanky. So I think maybe I would focus on these. I would focus on strength and constitution because both of these items use strength and constitution. And I want to make sure I have a 13 of each. So when you build a character, you have 50 points that you can spend on your stats. So you can have up to 50 points that you spend on your stats. So we want to make sure that we put in the points for these. And then depending on what your stats are, then your health, your hit points, your initiative points, and your psi points, those are derived from the 2 connected stats. So that would be a really cool way to just make a character from scratch by picking out a couple pieces of gear, speccing up your character to to that gear, and then you would have a really cool way to start the game. And I really do like that. There is one issue I have, though, with the starting gear. And I ran into this issue when I was playing yesterday. I took the Shield Maiden along with the Assassin and the Priestess out. And the starting gear is actually, it's pretty weak. And I ran into an issue where, okay, so my Squire's Sword on my Shield Maiden could only do 1 point of damage. I had a spear on my Assassin that could only do 1 point of damage, and a staff on my Priestess that could only do 1 point of damage. However, some of the level 1 monsters actually have 1 point of armor. And in order to damage those monsters, you need to do to do 1 point of damage on this monster, on this dark mage, I would need to do 2 points of damage. Well, the most I could do was 1 point of damage. And in the first room I went in, I drew a mercenary and a black knight. And both of those monsters had armor. And I was not able to damage them at all. And so it was really difficult because I just kind of had to run away from those monsters until I hopefully found a piece of gear that would allow me to do the damage necessary. There's also a chance that you could damage a monster with a low-level weapon by rolling a critical attack, but that is not a guarantee. One guarantee is to always take the warrior as a starting character in your party, because the warrior is the only character that does start with a 2 damage weapon. And so I could see that frustrating some people because they want to play as the Shield Maiden, but there is a chance that the monsters that you face at the beginning of the game, you actually will not be able to do damage to them unless you get really lucky on your rolls. And that, I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. And so that's why I did end up putting the Shield Maiden aside and taking the warrior so that I was able to wield this weapon here. And I could at least know that this one character could do damage to a monster. So that is one of the negatives. Another positive I have is just how the game is played on this initiative track. It's really cool the way that the action points work and how you keep track of who is going next as you are spending your action points and moving down or moving up on this initiative track. So here we have the setup. We have our my warrior, my priestess, and my assassin here. And we're kind of in the middle of a turn. My warrior and my assassin, they just looted some treasure there. My priestess has moved up. So I've spent some of my action points. What you're going to be doing is if you have all of these phases in a round. And so the first thing you do is you move your round token up 1 to keep track of which round you are on. And then you roll for initiative. And what you do is you take 2d10 and you roll those and you add your initiative score on your character. For instance, my warrior has an initiative of 16. So at the beginning of this round, I would have rolled 2d10, added 16, and then put my red token here for my warrior at that total. And that tells you how many action points you have for this round. And then depending on whose marker is highest on the initiative track, they go first. However, there is a little bit of a random kind of pressure luck, bad luck element in this game. Anytime you roll 2 1s in this game, that is a fumble. If you roll 2 1s for your initiative roll, you get knocked out for that turn and you actually can't participate in that whole round. So that is a little bit of a negative depending on how people feel about a little bit of player elimination. You could skip out an entire long turn in this game. Me playing solo with multiple characters, it's not that big of a deal. But if you were playing 6 players and you happen to roll 2 1s on your initiative roll, you could be sitting out for quite a long time on that turn. So that is also something to keep in mind. Now, you can also fumble when you attack. So if you roll 2 1s on your attack, your weapon might break. And as you level up in this game, you will have opportunities to roll more dice on your attack rolls. But as you know, the more dice you roll, you can get higher totals, but you also have a better chance of rolling multiple ones. So there is a kind of a pressure luck element in putting together your dice pool and then, trying to avoid your fumbles. So I do like that. I think that is pretty cool. But on this initiative track, another negative, I think, of this initiative track, even though I think the whole system is really cool, it's really convoluted. You're going to be spending a lot of time looking at this initiative track. And I think it is really important for the initiative track to look as appealing as possible. And right now it doesn't. It has very low aesthetic value on this initiative track. So I really hope that this is made to look a little more professional. Just the colors and the shapes and everything, it looks convoluted and it doesn't look appealing. And this is really kind of like the focus of the game. This is kind of the core mechanism that drives this game and makes this game really interesting. So let's show an example of some things you can do on a turn. I might get some rules wrong. I still don't have all of the rules memorized, so this is not a teaching video. I'm just kind of giving you an idea of the things you can do. So right now, my warrior is at initiative spot 23. I have 23 action points to go. And so he is going to go first. And what I want to do is I want to try to explore a new room. And so to do that, I need to move adjacent to a door. A door is kind of any opening here. And movement costs 1 point per square. And you can only move orthogonally. You cannot move adjacent diagonally. So I'm going to move 1, 2. Now I'm by that door. So I'm going to lower I spent 2 action points. So 1, 2. So now I'm down to 21. And anything that interrupts a movement, it ends that turn. So I've moved down, and I'm now at spot 21. But now it is green's turn, and green is my priestess. However, red is also on this initiative spot, so we could actually choose who is going to go next. I'm going to say that my warrior is going to go next because I want my warrior to reveal a new room. Revealing a new room costs 0 points. And what you do is you grab the next tile in your dungeon stack and you connect it to that door. So I'm going to draw that. And here we have so it has 2 doors and it also has 2 openings, which means that this is going to be a larger room. So we can choose how we want to position this. We could position it like this, which would give us access to these other areas. Or we could position it like this, which is going to give us access to this corridor with a treasure. And we want to do that, I think. All right, so I'm going to put that there. So we've revealed that room. There's a treasure there, so we're going to put a loot token there. So that is a place where we can loot. And then there's also a red monsters icon there. The red monster icons are only spawned on 6 players. I think the yellows is 5, greens is 4, and whites is always. So there is going to be a monster that is going to be spawning there. To do that, we draw the top card from our monster deck. And I have loaded this a little bit so we can see some different examples here. So I have at the top here, I have a goblin archer, a regular goblin, and a skeleton. And there are also these 3 different modifiers. So if you were to shuffle these, and then we could see which monster is going to be drawn at the white place here, it would be a skeleton. But let's say we drew one of these modifiers also. Let's say we drew target's head first. And this says, draw 1 additional monster card. The next monster is assigned this modifier. So if we would have drawn that, and the next we would have drawn the skeleton, this skeleton always targets heads when he attacks. So these modifiers, they augment the monsters and make them more powerful, give them more interesting abilities, make them more fun to fight, and they also will add to the total of experience and gold that you can get after you defeat them. So we'll say we drew this combination here, a skeleton who targets heads. Then I would go to my monster deck here and I would find my skeleton stat card. So you have your skeleton stat card here. He attacks with 3 dice. He has 0 armor. He does 2 damage. He has 2 health. He defends with 3 dice. And he has a psychic defense with 2 dice plus 2. He also has thin bones. Skeletons are entirely immune to any ranged weapons and can only be wounded with melee weapons or magic. So arrows just completely pass through him. That's super cool. He has an attack of a range 1. And he starts at initiative spot 8. So we're going to take our skeleton. We're going to take our black skeleton here. We're going to put him on the white spot there. And then we're going to take our black monster token. And we're going to put that on initiative track 8, which mentions skeletons, mercenaries, spear throwers, and dark mages. When the 8 is the highest in the initiative track, that skeleton is going to activate. Okay, so that was a 0 cost action to reveal that room. So now we could still have our warrior move. And I think we're going to have our warrior move 1, 2, 3 on top of that loot. So we will we will use 3 action points. So 1, 2, 3. And that has ended that warrior's turn in this phase here. So now we're at green. Now we're at the priestess. I think the priestess is going to... Oh, you know what we forgot to do? Because of these open spots here, these are considered large space rooms. So we need to go ahead and we need to finish out this room until no open borders are left. Okay, so we have this card here, which is a large bridge here. So that's going to be connected like that. And that is going to be a white monster spawn there. So we have a goblin. So we're going to go ahead and put our goblin on that token there, or that icon there. And then we can have our goblin card here. And the goblin is a green, so we will go ahead and we will draw our green monster token here. And we will put him on initiative slot number 9 on our track. Okay. Now we have this other open space there. Okay, so this is not a large room. This has 4 doors. So we can put that there. And then we would continue to spawn monsters there. Now this still has 1 opening. So we're going to draw that. And then we have that there. So we have put together this large room, and now that exploration is finished. We would also go ahead and spawn a monster there, but I'm not going to in this example. So it is our priestess's turn. I think we're going to position her next to this door here. So 1, 2, 3. She's going to use 3 action points. 1, 2, 3. And then she will look through that door on her next turn. And now it is Purple's turn. And now Purple is over here. I think we will just go ahead and position our assassin next to our priest. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lowering him down to 14. Okay, so now we have our warrior or a priestess can go next. So let's have our warrior go. And our warrior is going to go ahead and draw some loot. So when you are on top of one of these loot tokens, you can search, and you can search for a number of action points. You can search for treasure for 1 or 5. If you search for 1 action point, you are searching quickly, and you draw 1 loot card, and you can keep that piece of loot. However, it might be a trap, and if you draw that trap, you're going to have to deal with it. Or you can spend your time searching, and you can go ahead and spend 5 action points and draw 2 cards and keep the one you want. So let's go ahead and do that. So we will we will use 5 points here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bringing him down to 13. And now we can draw 2 loot cards from any of the 3 loot decks. So these are separated into 3 decks, 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to draw 1 and 2. Okay, so let's see what we got. Okay, so we have a Pentagramulet and a deflect object spell. Okay, so this is a trinket. This is a necklace that needs 7 constitution and 7 wisdom. I have a 13 constitution and a 5 wisdom, so I could keep this in order to use it later. Or I could try to get this spell, which needs an agility of 8 and a psi of 10. I only have a psi of 1. And so this is probably not going to be something that my warrior is going to use. I'm going to go ahead and keep the amulet, and then I will discard this spell. So that was the loot. And now it is we're back to our priestess. So our priestess here, she could go ahead and look through this door. That costs 0 action points. And oh man, look at that room. Okay, so this would be like that, I think, because that would go ahead and close off that area. I would not need to draw any more tiles. I would need to go ahead and spawn a monster there. And then these are gaps. And you can't move diagonally in this game, so you will have to jump across these gaps, and you will have to pass a jumping test to make sure that you don't take damage. And there's also loot over here, which to get to that loot, you would have to jump over a pit to get there, which is really cool. So so you keep spending your action points until it is eventually an enemy's turn. So let's say it was like this. And then now the green enemy was he is first up in the initiative order. So that green enemy would take its turn. And the enemies, all they want to do is they want to move and attack. So they will move a certain number of spaces towards you, and they will attack. So they will move 9, or this goblin will move 9 because he is at initiative track number 9, or initiative spot number 9. So he can move up to 9 spaces. The only way that he can get to us is to go along all this long way, all the way around there. So I think that's what he would do. So he would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that would give him down to 0 action points. So now it would be the black monster's turn, and that would be the skeleton. The skeleton has 8 action points because he's at the 8th spot on the initiative track. So he would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. And so on. And then after the monsters would move, then we are back down to our turn. And we keep doing that until everybody has gone to 0 action points. Now, what's really interesting is, let's say I was a warrior and I only had 1 action point left and I was going to fight this skeleton. And I wanted to use my hammer. My hammer costs 15 action points to use. It's a big, slow, heavy weapon. However, your last action for a turn can actually throw you into negative action points. So if I was on the initiative track spot number 2 here, this was my last action, I could go ahead and use this hammer for only 1 action point, bringing me down to 0. So you do want to think about where you're going to end up on your turn, and it is really beneficial to use a really slow weapon at the end of your turn, so that way it doesn't take up as much of your action points for that turn. Just a really interesting system. I know I kind of talked about it in a little bit of a convoluted way. I hope it made sense, but I've never seen this kind of initiative track mixed with action point system in a board game. It adds a lot of tactical decision making, but it doesn't make the game feel like a puzzle game. It doesn't make the game feel like Gloomhaven. It still feels like you're playing just a really fun kind of dice chucking dungeon crawl. But you do need to think about how you're going to move, how you're going to reveal new doors or new rooms, and where you are going to end up on the initiative track, where the monsters are. How much can you move before you need to stop? How many points can you spend in order to maybe end your turn going into the negative? Because that's super beneficial, using a super slow weapon like this hammer, or that longbow, which costs 20. You don't want to use that if you were at 21 to start your turn and you just automatically used your longbow. That would only leave you 1 action point with to do something on that round. So you would want to do a whole bunch of things first and then go into the negative to use that weapon at your last turn. And it's really interesting. I like this system a lot. One other thing that I do like are the different modes of play, because you have a whole bunch of standalone scenarios. There are going to be 16 standalone scenarios. There are 4 campaigns that have like around 8 or so scenarios that you can play as a campaign. And then the way that I've been having a lot of fun is just playing like this, is just setting up a random dungeon, just going through the dungeon tiles and kind of seeing how far I can get into the dungeon. One thing I would like to see is a deck of boss monsters, because for this kind of random dungeon mode, I would like to be able to play where I could go through a dungeon, reach level 4 of the monsters. Once the monsters are going to be moving on this track here, this Doom track. And each time you circle through the Doom track, the monster level is going to go up by 1. So a really cool, just kind of random mode would be, as soon as the monsters reach level 4, then the next monster that spawns is a random boss, and you have to fight the boss. And if you beat the boss, then you win. Just this kind of like random dungeon mode. I would love to see that. Right now, there really aren't any boss cards. There are bosses in some of the campaigns, but they're not easily accessible. So if we just had a deck of like 8 or so different boss monsters to play a kind of random dungeon mode, I think that would be really, really cool. But yeah, I like that this game works as a standalone. It works as a standalone scenario. It works as a campaign game. And it also works as just kind of a random dungeon mode. I would also like to see a deck of cards that adds a little bit of variety while you are exploring. And Victor, the designer, was saying that he's thinking about making a deck of door cards for when you open a door to reveal a new room. You could draw a card that might have something going on with that door, or some kind of random, maybe a non-combat event. Maybe you have to pick the lock. Maybe the door is trapped. that kind of thing. I think that would also be a really cool addition to this kind of like random mode that I'm really enjoying. One final thing I would really like to see is in the campaign system. So let's actually I want to let's find the Grim Reaper campaign. So the Grim Reaper campaign, you play scenario number 1, and then after you are done with scenario number 1, there are 6 or so different scenarios called 2A through like 2A through 2F. And you can tackle those in any order. So you can go from 1 to like 2B, then you can go to 2A, and you have to do them in order because you're trying to get these pieces of armor in order to like face the Grim Reaper or something like that. And each of the campaigns does come with a little map, which shows where the various scenarios are. But the map really is just for looks. There is no traveling. So what I think would be really cool as well is if there was in each of the campaigns, there was a travel chart that you could roll on to have a random travel event as you traveled from quest to quest. It wouldn't take like a lot more, many more components or anything. It wouldn't have to be a deck of cards. It could just be a D10 chart or a 2D10 chart, a D100 chart, perhaps in each one of the scenarios that could have a tailor-made travel chart for that scenario. I think that would add a ton of just random, again, another pool of randomness to pull from for this game. But yeah, I do. There's some really cool things about this game. I like the way that the dungeons look when they're done. They're interesting how you have some of those big wide open rooms, but you also have these nice little corridors. I like how when you reveal these rooms that don't have edges, you keep drawing tiles until you complete the room. That is super cool because it makes for some like big, large areas, and those are kind of offset by these corridor type areas. Yeah, and the rulebook is pretty good. There are only a couple little things that I think it's well organized. It does have an index. I've used the index a couple times looking up rules, and it has been helpful. There is a little bit of confusion, I think, in the rule book. Instead of saying orthogonal, the rule book says adjacent, but it doesn't. The game doesn't consider diagonals to be adjacent. I think that the rule book should go ahead and state that things are orthogonal, not diagonal, because everything in this game is built upon an orthogonal system. You can't move diagonally. You can't attack diagonally. To attack diagonally, it's actually a range of 2 because you go 1, 2. So, but a lot of the times the book will say, well, you need to attack only an adjacent character. But in a lot of games, the diagonals are also considered adjacent. But in this game, they are not. That could be defined somewhere in the book, but I think it would be better if instead of saying adjacent, it said orthogonal. I also have a little bit of confusion with some of the ways that the characters progress through the campaign. I was hoping to hear from Victor before I made this video because I'm kind of on a strict schedule. My dungeon dive docket for for these next few days to get videos done has just I can only keep this game set up for a certain amount of time before I need to move on to focus on some other games this week. But I'm a little confused about some of the character progression in a campaign. The way that it's worded, it leads me to believe that it could cause some issues. So hopefully, maybe I'll post my question to Victor in the comments below, or maybe at BGG, and then we can get his answer there and some clarification on character progression in a campaign. But yeah, overall, I think Dungeons of Doria has... Oh yeah, one other thing. And somebody else mentioned this on my last video, and I've thought about this for a long time, ever since I first saw the logo for the game. The coin symbols look like oranges. They look like orange slices, and every time I see it, I think of like the Stone Roses album cover with the orange for an O. And somebody else mentioned like, hey, you might want to think about changing those because it looks like slices of orange in the logo, and I do have to agree with that. It is, I mean, it's not, it's a little nitpicky, but other people are thinking it, in addition to me, so I just thought I would mention it. But, yeah, I think there's a lot to this game that people are going to like. It offers up it is a combat and loot heavy game played with this kind of random mode. You do get kind of this roguelike, feel to it. I love the stats and how your character is all about the stats and the loot, and you build your character towards loot. I think the initiative track is just awesome, and how the action points and the initiative system works is really cool. It leads to some really interesting turns and things happening. The way it looks though needs a big overhaul. Because this is such a central part of the game, it really needs to be aesthetically pleasing, because you're going to be looking at this a lot. And I do wish that there was just some other little things added to the game, and so just some minor tweaks to really kind of elevate this to a really like a great status, from like good to great. And so far, I think it's really good and it's almost great. And I think that it can get there with just a couple small little pushes. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this very long and somewhat rambling video on Dungeons of Doria. We will talk to you later. Bye bye.